Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a few minutes so that we can distribute the link. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for waiting patiently. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, we're gonna kick off and get started here. Good evening, everybody. Buenas tardes. Thank you so much for joining our panel discussion tonight. I really want to just take a moment to appreciate everyone who's tuning in for their flexibility. As organizers of this event at the Philly Liberation Center, we had to pivot quickly and translate tonight's program to a virtual format due to some heating issues at our physical location. And so I'm hoping that lots of you were still able to join from the warmth of your own homes on this really cold day. And I hope that everybody still feels in community with us on this call, even though we're not physically gathered. Just to introduce myself, my name is Xiomara Torres. I'm a Puerto Rican woman. I'm a community organizer, and I'm a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. You know, the PSL is a national party with branches all over the country. But here in our city in Philly, we operate out of the Philadelphia Liberation Center, a community educational and organizing hub that really functions as a building block of socialism, bringing people together to struggle around critical issues that we face in our workplaces, our schools, and our neighborhoods in order to struggle for better and for a better future. The Liberation Center and the PSL at large believe in the need for a socialist reorganization of our society to serve the needs of working and poor people and to help us all live dignified lives, and quite frankly, to save this planet. We believe that there's no better time than now to fight for a revolution and to build socialism in the United States. And when I say build socialism, I'm talking about building a future that puts human life first, not profits. Building a society where our country's resources and the wealth that's produced by hardworking people is actually spent on making our lives better. The PSL is a party based inside the United States, the belly of the beast, the core of imperialism. But in everything that we do, we try to stand in solidarity with people around the world who are resisting capitalist exploitation. And we recognize that only under socialism can the nations of the world, Caribbean countries included, be freed from the shackles of imperialism. So one of the ways that we express our solidarity is by hosting events like tonight's panel. And as a Caribbean socialist myself, our topic tonight is one that I'm really excited about. From the Haitian Revolution to the Cuban Revolution to the decades-long struggle of Puerto Rico for its independence, US imperialism has done everything in its power to crush the movement of the people of the Caribbean towards democracy and self-determination. For centuries, imperialist powers treated the Caribbean as their cash cow, and that was entirely to the detriment of working Caribbeans. In Puerto Rico, for example, the last colony of the United States and the oldest in the world, this continues to be the case even today. But for as long as this colonial exploitation has existed in the Caribbean, so has popular resistance to that exploitation. And so tonight we'll hear from a few different panelists who will share about some of the challenges faced and victories won by working class people in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Haiti. And it's my hope that everyone will leave this Zoom call tonight having learned something and feeling lots and lots of revolutionary optimism. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first of three amazing panelists tonight, Fermin Morales. Fermin is a fellow Puerto Rican. He's a member of the organization Philly Boricuas. He is an electrician by trade and a member of IBEW Local 98. He's a longtime organizer in the struggle for the independence of Puerto Rico. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Fermin. And I'm going to give you the floor now. I'm really excited to get started.
Well, hello, everyone. And I hope you're having a nice day in this cold weather. And I hope you're all warm. Basically, just to start out and as so people understand that it'll be in May 1st of 2003 and we are in the year 2023, it will be 20 years since the celebration of U.S. Navy leaving the island of Vieques, Puerto Rico. And why did I point out to this subject is because it's really where I got baptized in the line of fire, in the struggle, and how that struggle, but finally it heated up to the point where we were able to oust them out of Vieques, Puerto Rico, because we're not a very big island, and we know that the military, U.S. military, is located in over 700, installations all over the world, probably more than that, some that we don't know about. But when you talk about their installations in big countries like, Germany, like Japan, like South Korea, like the Philippines, Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, which is in the Caribbean, and all these other places. And the fact that they were using an island, not just Vieques. I mean, if anybody who knows, how big Puerto Rico is, and how many smaller islands they have, there's like three other islands that they have that are populated. Well, two of them that are populated of the other three, and those two were used as military bases, basically to see if the people of those islands, which is Vieques and Culebra, if the people were going to leave. And unfortunately, we have two things in Puerto Rico that's difficult for us. One, it could be a strategic point to do trade, which is a good thing, but unfortunately, it is also a strategic point for militarism in order to attack other countries. And that's what people have to realize. That's what Vieques was about. Vieques was about an island which had 180 days of military training, whether it was amphibious to go like through the shores and attack other countries, or whether it was to basically, do aerial bombings. And the people of Vieques really in general never wanted them there. And the people of the bigger island also, wanted to leave. It was part of our colonialistic experience with the United States, which also will be 125 years as of this year. And people have to realize we were so militarized. We had 15% of our national territory was military bases. Now you take an island which is only maybe 3,600 square miles, and you multiply that by 15%. You can't even compare that to, how many military bases there are in the Philippines, which is a lot bigger, or military bases which is in South Korea, which is a lot bigger, or even Cuba, which has Guantanamo Bay. We were completely militarized. We were basically, the idea is, and it has always been the case, is how you get Puerto Ricans out of Puerto Rico, how you destabilize them. If they don't leave, you destabilize them. And how this even scares people from even believing, even in their own identity, how they develop, they're supposed to take another identity that they are not. And being there, being involved in this struggle, and not only the people of Puerto Rico, but how strong the diaspora in the United States basically fought to get the U.S. Navy. Having been there in 1999, having done civil disobedience in Philadelphia, I know some of you probably weren't even born yet, but I mean, seeing, people who participated in that civil disobedience. 1999 was a hotspot year for Puerto Ricans because it was the liberation of 16 political prisoners that were commuted to sentences by Bill Clinton. I was arrested in Washington, D.C. for that event. So, I remember, being involved in that and how difficult it was and how grateful we saw when we saw them liberated and just having them back in our communities. It's just like this year when we got Ana Belén Montes back, after helping Cuba out, with American aggression, military aggression. What's interesting about Vieques and about Culebra, which these military trainings were happening, is that they're people of color. And it's a way of division. It's a way of division because I come from a small town which is mountainous. Mainly the people that look like me. They're not as much of color as they are in Vieques and Culebra and certain other areas. So it is a way for some people to say, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm, but you have to look at it that it does affect you. You are, whether you're light skinned or whatever, we all come from the motherland, Africa. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? If we all have to realize that it affects us all, whether we're people of color or not, and remembering those struggles and who were the catalyst of those struggles. It was the fishermen. It was the working class fishermen of Vieques and some of the leaders and getting to meet one of the leaders who passed away in 2002, one of the great heroes, because we always talk about Pedro Albizu Campo. Everybody talks about Pedro Albizu Campo, Mulato, or we talk about who was the father of the nation of Puerto Rico, which is Ramon Emeterio Betances. And, and they were people of color. But nobody really talks about Carlos Zenon and the fishermen, and how these fishermen were the one who were the main catalyst and confronted the Navy, and how they could not fish because of it. And they weren't rich, they were just regular fishermen, but they knew how to organize, and they organized people. And not only having met Carlos Zenon, meeting his wife Aleida, who wrote a great book. I just put the book up real quick, just for you to see this book. This book is something, maybe I'll write it in the chat. So if it's in Spanish, but if you can get this book, it's a great book on the struggle of ousting the U.S. Navy, which took more than 70 years of it to get the U.S. Navy out. But it was constant civil disobedience. But the interesting part of it is it took everybody to get the Navy out. It was all political people from different political parties in Puerto Rico, people who thought it was damaging the environment. You didn't have to believe in independence. You could believe in the environment. And people massively did civil disobedience. If you thought the march, one of the biggest marches we had around that time, it was 150,000 people marched, and it was called Paz para Vieques, to get the U.S. Navy out of Vieques. And this little small island that I call my home, little small island, which if you look at all the countries in the world, and you could say how many of them are much bigger than Puerto Rico. And we did a feat that was almost like people to say today that it's almost like impossible. And we were able to oust the U.S. Navy out of Puerto Rico, not just of Vieques, but of Culebra, and it forced them to leave even Roosevelt Roads, which was another military big installation, because they also used planes there to basically train their soldiers. So I mean, just thinking that it's 20 years and being there, being in Vieques, stopping trucks from going in there to go in there, doing civil disobedience, all that, all those men being in the line of fire and seeing 20 years later that they're still gone is something that makes you feel good, and for those of you who don't know, it was used to attack Haiti. It was trained to attack Haiti. It was trained to attack Grenada in 1983, Haiti in 1993. It was used to attack Kosovo. It was used to attack, it was like a trampoline to attack other nations in the world, and we were basically the guinea pigs, of all their bombs. It was napalm was tested in Puerto Rico. So was depleted uranium was used in Puerto Rico. Don't be surprised if depleted uranium is used by the United States and Ukraine in against Russia. Don't be surprised. But it was used first. It was used in Vieques, Puerto Rico. I'm good. That's my time for now. Maybe we'll talk a little more. But that's 20 years now, and there's a reason for hope. That's all I'm saying. There's a reason for hope.
Thank you so much, Fermin. That has me feeling hopeful already, and also really outraged to whenever I hear about what happened in Vieques and how the U.S. military behaved in Vieques. It's outrageous to think that there are generations of people who grew up in Puerto Rico and Vieques who lived in a war zone, essentially, just for U.S. military practice. Okay, we're going to move on to our second panelist now, who I'm excited to hear from. This panelist's name is Gasso Goba. Gasso is an African queer woman, former sex worker, and organizer with Sex Workers Outreach Project, Baltimore, and a member of Black Alliance for Peace. She's currently working on her master's degrees at Widener University in clinical social work and human sexuality education to work with survivors of sexual and interpersonal violence, people who abuse, and to teach comprehensive sexuality education that includes consent and bodily autonomy. As a survivor of child sexual abuse and a daughter of immigrants from Sierra Leone, she intimately understands the importance of dismantling oppressive systems to support the well-being of children, families, and communities. And she's hoping to go to Cuba this year to learn more about the new Families Code enshrined into their constitution in 2022. Caso, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm excited for these slides and everything you have to say.
Awesome. I appreciate the introduction, Ziomata, and for the Party for Socialism and Liberation here in Philadelphia putting this event on and including Black Alliance for Peace Philly. So I'm going to speak a little bit about what the Black Alliance for Peace position is on the situation in Haiti today. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Black Alliance for Peace. We are an organization that is seeking to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the Black radical movement. We are tirelessly working to build alliances, not only here in the US, but globally, while working on short and intermediate goals, such as opposing the increases to the US military budget, ending the 1033 program, which is essentially a program that allows local police departments to gain access to excess military grade equipment. We're also working to end the deadly exchange program, which basically allows US police, military, and FBI officials to go and train in Israel, where they can exchange tactics with the Israeli occupied forces on how to better suppress and murder us here in the US, along with shutting down AFRICOM, just to name a few. And we're comprised of different committees. Of course, the coordinating committee, but along with the coordinating committee, we also have the Africa team, the outreach team, the Haiti Americas team, the Solidarity Network, and the research and political education team. And our main campaign that really oversees all of the work that we do within the Black Alliance for Peace and across all of our chapters is essentially no compromise and no retreat. We are working tirelessly to defeat the war against Africans and Black people, not only here in the US, but also abroad. Next slide. So the crisis in Haiti is essentially a crisis of imperialism. Now, you'll often hear people say that Haiti is being punished for being the only successful slave rebellion in which Haiti has been free for over 200 years now. And I really like to emphasize the beginning of the revolution was started with a Vodun ceremony. That's always something that has interested me. But since the success of the Haitian Revolution after 13 years of struggle, because Haiti was forced to basically become indebted to France via extortion, via the threat of war, close to $90 million, Haiti has had to repay in debt. And that has left the Haitian economy in scrambles. I mean, you have, just for point of reference, over 50% of the population in Haiti is living below the poverty line. And so this kind of gives us an understanding of how US and Western political and economic powers had a stage to continually intervene in Haiti, starting in 1915 with the assassination of the Haitian president Theodore Sam. And that's when the US occupies Haiti for 19 years, basically trying to shore up their own economic and political interest for the capitalist and imperial powers. And after 1915, you have a successful student uprising in which that lasted from the student uprising started in 1929, and in 1934 is when they successfully defeated US military occupation and they withdrew. But in 2004, you again had another coup d'etat that was basically sponsored by the core group, who I'll touch on a little bit about later, comprised of some powers like the United States, France, and Canada, where they dethroned another president in Haiti. And they established what was known by the United Nations as the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti. And I'm sure y'all have seen the reports that have come out after just the grotesque dealings that the MONUSTA operation had. I mean, from dumping feces into the drinking water of Haitians, which basically facilitated an outbreak of cholera. It's estimated to have murdered 10 to 50,000 people, to the sexual violence that the Haitian population had to endure of the quote unquote peacekeeping mission, where you essentially have girls who are below the age of 18, some of them even 11, having fathered children of these quote unquote peacekeepers. And so this is, and then again, we see the assassination of Jovenel Moïse in 2021, and the US-backed, basically implemented president, quote unquote, of Ariel Henry. And of course, this is completely undemocratic. The Haitian masses and working class have not really been allowed to have a democratically elected leader. I want to say since a president, the president who was ousted in 2004, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, and this is again because of imperialist interventions, imperialist colonial interventions that are violently suppressing the working class and working poor in Haiti, and really only seeking to use this power for their own economic and capitalist gain. And so some of the groups that are responsible for this imperial and neocolonial violence are groups like the core group, which are comprised of 9 members. Some of them are the United States, Germany, the EU, Spain, Brazil, France, the Organization of American States, and the UN, along with, again, as I mentioned, the Organization of American States, which is comprised of 34 states in that region, but predominantly funded by the US. In fact, they get close to 60% of their funding from the United States. And so this makes the Organization of American States basically a US proxy, in which they are allowed to perpetuate their imperialist violence onto Haiti through these quote unquote peacekeeping missions, through these organizations that claim to want to bring peace and stability and democracy to the region. But as we have seen time and time again, it is really to shore up US and Western powers to better position themselves to challenge socialist states and their successes in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Nicaragua. Next slide, please. And so I also wanted to share a video that was put together by the Black Alliance for Peace Haiti Americas team that also touches on Southcom, which is another group that which is basically a military faction of the United States that perpetuates imperialist violence. If we could go ahead and play that video. Solid, thanks. If not, that's totally fine, and I can just point people in the direction of where to find that resource. Oh.
I just got it sent to me. Let me pull up that link and I can share that right now.
Solid, appreciate you.
Prison system, the law, the police, the prison system, the law. It's no secret that these institutions intentionally crush and terrorize Black and oppressed people within the U.S. But the brutal violence the U.S. military inflicts on colonized Black and brown people
is often hidden from our view. Even though the U.S. military is the largest and most expensive of any country, by far.
We have new, beautiful equipment that comes along with $2.5 trillion in spending, all made in the USA.
The U.S. military has literally divided the earth into 11 areas of responsibility, each patrolled by a different command.
The U.S. Southern Command, or Southcom, polices one of these areas of responsibility. The Southcom region covers 15 million miles
and represents about 1/6 of the landmass of the world. Headquartered in Miami, U.S. Southern Command includes 32 countries, 19 in Central and South America and 13 in the Caribbean.
And that's not to mention 16 U.S. colonies like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, which don't have political independence as sovereign states and are not represented in the U.S. government.
Southcom grew out of the U.S. military occupation of Panama in the first decade of 1900. This was when the U.S. government built the Panama Canal to secure trade routes for its elite and business class. It was established during World War II, originally under the name Caribbean Defense Command,
and formalized the government's control over the Caribbean, which had begun decades prior during the Panama invasion. Now, Southcom has at least 4 bases in the region, including Guantanamo Bay in Cuba.
The U.S. military uses its bases in Honduras and El Salvador as access points to reach other strategic locations, such as Nicaragua, Venezuela and Colombia, and Guatemala.
Joint exercises and military-to-military contact programs between the United States and regional militaries are a major aspect of Southcom's activities.
While Southcom says these military operations promote security cooperation,
we built that team, we built that camaraderie,
build regional partnerships, and strengthen democratic principles.
In reality,
Southcom programs have supported dictatorial regimes and militarized governments in the region,
like that of Papa and Baby Doc, who ruled Haiti in the late 1950s until the mid-1980s.
and the Colombian government, which right now is killing indigenous and African-descended human and land rights activists.
These governments do the bidding of the U.S. by economically exploiting their own country for the benefit of U.S. corporations and by squashing popular rebellion.
As natural disasters and political crises, including the U.S.-led war on drugs, escalated in the 1990s, Southcom activity increased.
Good evening. This is the first time since taking the oath of office that I felt an issue was so important, so threatening, that it warranted talking directly with you, the American people. All of us agree that the gravest domestic threat facing our nation today is drugs. Tonight, I'm announcing a strategy that reflects the coordinated, cooperative commitment of all our federal agencies.
Every year, Southcom uses humanitarian assistance exercises and disaster response efforts as military training platforms.
But instead of stemming drug flows and feeding the poor, Southcom's true goal is to destabilize socialist countries like Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, as well as disrupt Latin American and Caribbean nations' relationship with Russia, China, and Iran.
The absolute urgency with which we have to maintain our competitive edge in this region, increasingly contested strategic space in the global competition with China and Russia. And we do maintain our positional advantage here. However, that advantage is eroding, and it's challenging our ability to maintain the favorable balance of regional power directly called for here in this hemisphere in the National Defense Strategy.
The Black Alliance for Peace stands against the growing influence and power of Southcom and its ever-increasing militarization of the region.
We demand the end of Southcom and call for a zone of peace in Latin America and the Caribbean, in which the people's right to self-determination is realized.
And conflicts between nations are resolved peacefully. No compromise, no retreat.
Solid. Thanks to whoever supported the technical difficulties there. And so I just want to continue with the ending of that, where they were talking about Black Alliance for Peace demands. That's going to be I think the 5th slide. Yes, this one right after. Oh no, the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Recently the Black Alliance for Peace Haiti Americas team released a press statement opposing the Buenos Aires declaration that was just announced via the community of Latin American Caribbean states, in which they recognize Ariel Henry, which is basically like states in that region recognizing Juan Guaido from Venezuela, and basically supporting a military intervention in Haiti, and that does not have the masses collective support. And so they released a 11-point document, and in points 101 and 102, they endorse a military intervention. And so what the Black Alliance for Peace is calling for is for CELAC, which is again the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, to support what CELAC Social has put out, demanding that the region is giving its own response to the Haitian question and respects the principle of non-intervention and the right of the Haitian people to define their sovereignty and their own destiny. And so that is one of the more pressing things, but that we're demanding right now. But in addition to that, we're also again demanding the end of the UN occupation of Haiti by the UN Integrated Office without renewing or adding another force. We're also calling on Russia and China as permanent members of the UN Security Council to reject foreign intervention that does not have support of the masses of the Haitian people. The dissolution of the core group, which has undermined Haiti's sovereignty and autonomy. A forensic accounting of all financial and commercial interests of the core group members in Haiti. The release of all correspondence, minutes, and documentation of the core group has produced on Haitian affairs, calling on progressive and leftist governments in the region to support true anti-imperialist peace in Haiti and not contribute to ongoing intervention and occupation, and to support the Haitian people to assert their own sovereignty through organizations and institutions that represent the interests of the people, particularly the poor and the working class. Next slide. So this, of course, has been a very brief introduction to the Black Alliance for Peace position on the situation in Haiti. I would encourage you all to visit our website, and where you can find a wide variety of resources, from teach-ins to fact sheets to webinars, including Jemima Pierre, who is on our BAP Haiti's Americas team. She is a Haitian scholar and professor based in California. And I'd also encourage you to go ahead and access that QR code where you can sign a letter to Joe Biden demanding that he and the Organization of American States end the illegal and colonial interventions in Haiti. And I'll go ahead and end it there. And I appreciate y'all's time, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Gasso. I know you said that was a very brief introduction, but that was so, so informative. And I appreciate all of the thought that you put into that. Finally, last but certainly not least on our panel, we're going to have my comrade Lupe Fernandez Nunez talking about Cuba. Lupe is a volunteer with the Philly Liberation Center and a student organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They recently returned from a delegation to Cuba in January, where they got to meet with members of the Cuban parliament to learn more about Cuba's legislative process, and met with many other professionals in different sectors of the Cuban workforce, learning about their struggles in the face of the cruel, decades-long US-imposed blockade. So, Lupe, the floor is yours.
Thank you guys so for that very amazing presentation, Fredmin, for your time. It's been really amazing to get to hear from both of your perspectives on these really incredible and important issues to comprehend. So just want to talk a little bit about my recent trip and learning about the struggles that the Cuban people have really endured for the past really 64 years, well, longer than that, but 64 years since the Cuban Revolution began. So I recently traveled to Cuba with the Cuba Venezuela Solidarity Committee in December to January for 2 weeks, and it was truly an eye-opening experience to get to hear from the Cuban people firsthand about their struggles that are inextricably tied to a fight for a better world for all of us. And while I was there, actually, people were celebrating the 64th anniversary of the Cuban Revolution, and it was really incredible to get to see that firsthand, people celebrating in the streets, really proud to be with each other, in solidarity with each other, and defending their sovereignty against so much foreign intervention from the United States. And Cuba itself, just since its from its inception has been a truly revolutionary, has truly revolutionary history, struggling against foreign intervention. It has legendary figures such as the indigenous leader Hatue, Jose Marti, Antonio Maceo, Julio Antonio Mella, and these are revolutionaries who saw wrong in the world. And for example, the Spanish occupation of Cuba saw a wrong and felt inherent call to make it right. And they're as young as many of us here, and that's something to really keep in mind, is that it's just people who see, the everyday people like us, working class people that see a wrong and want to come into action. And for example, like Julio Antonio Mella would found the Communist Party of Cuba when he was 15. So it just goes to show that really at any age and at any stage in your life, you can really join the struggle. And really, in my time in Cuba, I was able to see the spirit of these revolutionaries in everyday Cubans, in light of all the hardships that they've endured with the blockade that is US imposed. And the Cuban people remain steadfast in their dedication to defending their country against foreign intervention, to defending their socialist system. And it's socialist and very proud about it. And I actually had the great pleasure of meeting with Irma, the mother of one of the Cuban Five, Rene. The Cuban Five are 5 Cuban intelligence agents who were unjustly incarcerated in the United States for the act of simply protecting their country from terrorist attacks from US-backed groups such as Brothers to the Rescue, who were planning bombings in Havana, planning to them dropping, like, basically encouraging counter-revolutionary actions in Cuba through the dropping of leaflets over the country going into Cuban airspace. And they were unjustly incarcerated due to that. And just wanted to say that she actually started a community center in a neighborhood right outside of Havana. And it was really, really inspiring to see that firsthand, how in light of so much that they're struggling to really have, like coloring books, the simple necessities that to us every day seems like, we don't give it a second thought. If we need something, we can go to the store and get it. But for Cubans, it's very, very difficult for them to get the everyday necessities, especially for children. Community members are just come together to really give the children a very enriching educational experience, really being there for them for no cost at all, just being there to teach them arts, paper mache. They were teaching us how they give like courses in paper mache to their children, and just showing us the little, actually I can show you real quick, like these little boat that they made for us, and like little cute things that they do like this. And it's makes such a big difference to your educational experience that you're learning to do these things. It's not all about going to school to put your head down, get the work done, and just go there to learn discipline and really just go through the motions. It's really about a truly enriching experience. And they're doing that, all of that in spite of all of the hardships that they've endured. And it's really important to keep in mind also that they keep in mind the whole community. In spite of all this, they're keeping in mind the whole community. So for example, for their elderly population, they have classes 3 times a week. For the elderly to come in to keep mobility, to do Tai Chi, things like that. And just keeping them in the community with asking, do you need errands run for you? Making sure that those elderly who may not have family, they may have had to move for one reason or another, that they're taken care of. Everybody is brought up. And nobody is forgotten or left behind. If you need something, that is provided for you. And it goes to show there's so much, like it was so inspirational to get to see the dedication and just the liveliness of the children there, and just how dedicated they were, like, to keep going. And it just really goes, and Irma, just hearing her speak, it was really truly amazing just to hear how much she's endured, how much she's seen in her lifetime. And one story that she's told me in particular that has really stuck with me is the story of her talking about when the US was in Cuba, particularly the Marines, how she saw firsthand how Marines would try to entice the poor Cuban children to go into the ocean by dropping pennies off of the boat and try to basically entice the children to go in and risk their lives. And it goes to show the cruelty to which the US just goes in with no regard for human life to just keep just trying to poke at like the morale of the Cuban people, to keep enticing them to just keep wanting to keep struggling. So that's just a story that really stuck with me, and is really just heartbreaking to continue to hear about, and just the cruelty of the American machine. And not even just in the community center, I saw the revolutionary spirit in the doctors that we met in the Matanzas province, who have such a preventative care system that is still it still leaves me shocked, like speechless, being here today and hearing about, for example, the maternity wards that they have for women who are in high risk pregnancies, how they have a zero, and now, no exaggeration, as of last year, 0 infant mortality rate in the Matanzas province. And that's something you don't hear about here. Instead, you hear about it's double or triple the rate for Black and women of color to die during childbirth. And for them, it's like it's just natural for them, even and again, I will emphasize this again, in spite of the great limitations that they have to their medical system, because they aren't able to access the prenatal supplements that we can. They aren't able to access certain medical supplies. And I'm very, very fortunate to have been able to be with the delegation that actually helped deliver medication like that, prenatal supplements, other medication that they needed, pain relievers and things like that. But it just goes to show that in having a preventative healthcare system, and them in just valuing human lives over anything, over profit, that we don't have to have people unnecessarily dying every day at such an astronomical rate for no reason other than because it's not lining the pockets of those in the top 1%. So it just goes to show that a different world is possible. Even again, in light of all the struggles that they're going through, it is possible to be there for your fellow neighbor and be there for your fellow community member. So it was really astounding to get to see that. And just another thing that here I'll point out is, I also, as CEO mentioned, I was able to really meet with like parliament members, and it was really amazing to get to learn how democratic, as much as you might hear in the news and things like that Cuba has no elections, everything's predestined for them. The people go out to vote. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they had around 40,000 meetings just about the Families Code. They had 40,000 meetings, and they talked about it to no end, to make sure everybody's input, and they made it in a manner that was accessible to everybody. If you couldn't get a physical copy, you could get it online. And if you could get it online, the way you could give feedback is through doing it on an online forum. And they made sure everybody's voice was heard in the making of that document. And that's something you would never hear about in the United States. The laws that we have implemented, the budgetary considerations that we have, they're all made without any input from the people, because I'm sure that if it was for the people, we wouldn't have shortages of baby formula. We wouldn't have shortages of medication for babies. We wouldn't have shortages just for the things that we need. We wouldn't be sending billions of dollars overseas to fight in a war that is inhumane. We just see suffering. But we don't take care of like the people here who are struggling. We just do it to line the pockets of those like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. But it just was astounding to get to even meet the parliament members, and also just to know how young they were, because you see the parliament, the Congress people here, and they're in their 60s, 70s. I was very shocked to meet a parliament member that was my age, actually. He was 22 years old, and he's actually a leading chairperson in one of their committees. 22 years old. That is the closest that any government member is ever going to get to me. And it just really is mind-blowing that the youth are valued there. They have a say, and it's part, like, you are not in. And also another thing to point out is that you don't come to power in government just by whoever has the most money, whoever's pouring money into your campaign to get the most ads. You are nominated by your community if they think you're an upstanding member, they will nominate you by your character. By your character, whether you truly have the interest of the people in mind. And it just goes to show that this is such a possibility for us. Like, Cuba is a living example of what we can achieve. And even in the light of their struggles, they are still persisting and still struggling. And I saw that in the eyes of every Cuban person that I met, that they love their country and that they are willing to struggle for it for as long as it takes to defend the Cuban Revolution and the changes that Fidel brought in light of all of the U.S. intervention, the dictatorship of Batista. And it just goes to show how much, like, an example that we have for them. But as strong as they are, what we should be doing is all advocating for the end of the U.S. imposed blockade that is inhumane. As much as people love to say that the sanctions are soft, it's not actual warfare. It's causing suffering. It's causing hunger for the Cuban people. It is causing suffering for the Cuban people. There is a hospital that we visited that they can't get their CT machine fixed because a part that they need is manufactured by a US company. And because of the blockade, they can't get it imported. So now their CT machine is just stuck in their hospital without use. And now people can't get the benefit of that CT machine. Something that is just, again, second thought to us here, we can just fix it. But there they know that they have it, but they just can't get that part because of the blockade. So people are unnecessarily not receiving the full medical care that they could get because of the blockade. So it just, in light of all of that, at the end of the day, the US needs to let Cuba live. We need to demand the end of the US blockade and demand that the US lets Cuba live. So just with that, I just really want to say thank you all for having me here. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lupe. I also got to visit Cuba back in May, I believe, and I share so many of your impressions from your visit. And really what stuck with me from your presentation is the idea of, like, all this unnecessary manufactured human suffering that has happened in the Caribbean and all over the world because of US imperialism. And, you mentioned that anecdote about the US military, like, dropping pennies to just torture, essentially, and incite dissatisfaction with the Cuban government and the revolution. And something that always is just, like, mind-blowing to me, there's a document straight out of Washington by Lester Mallory from, like, the 1960s, right after the Cuban Revolution triumphed. And you can look this up. It's, like, easily accessible government information, but direct quotes from that document say, the majority of Cubans support Castro. There is no effective political opposition. And the only foreseeable means of alienating support is through disenchantment and disaffection based on economic dissatisfaction and hardship, denying money and supplies to Cuba to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. And so just emphasizing, time and time again, we see these, like, forms of hybrid warfare, right? Not necessarily soldiers and boots on the ground and bombs, but economic sanctions and information wars and the spreading of falsehoods to try to overthrow sovereign peoples and expand US imperialist interests. And so I just want to thank you all again for those amazing presentations. And I hope that people watching along have been learning a lot and enjoying. I have, like, a few questions that I want to ask our panelists and put out there for anybody to answer. And in the meantime, I want to encourage folks who are watching our live stream to share questions in the chat on YouTube if you have them, and we will go ahead and try to ask your questions, as many as we can get to in the time allotted for tonight. So let's see. I have a few different questions for you all, and I feel like some of this was touched on in the presentations already. One of my questions is, colonialism depends so much on stripping Native peoples of their confidence as a people, of their cultural identity, like you were saying, Fermin, of their political voice and power. And I'm wondering, how did the Cuban and Haitian revolutions reallocate power to working and poor people through expanding democracy, if you all can think of examples of that? And you spoke to this a little bit, Lupe, already, but how does democracy in a place like Cuba or other places in the Caribbean differ from democracy in a place like the US? In places like Puerto Rico, where the US is still imposing foreign domination, what are different ways that people are trying to push back against that and create their own forms of democratic resistance? That's one of my questions. A second one that I have for you guys is, how have diaspora communities related to Caribbean struggles for democracy and for national liberation? And how are our struggles here in the US linked to struggles in the Caribbean? What lessons can we learn? Anybody who wants to take a stab at any of those, feel free.
And just for Casso and Fermin, I can put those questions in the chat as well for you guys.
Thank you, Lupe.
Well, what I can say is, I've also been to Cuba, and like Lupe was saying, a lot of the discussions on issues are brought out to the people, and you see that discussion really happening, and issues are part of the ballots, in Cuba. They're not like you come here and I'll give you a good example. In Puerto Rico, how many referendums do you have to have before you actually do something about it? And people are saying the last two referendums are sick and tired of these referendums. They don't even vote anymore on the referendums. And then the first couple of ones, which you voted for a better relationship with the United States, they don't even pay attention to them. But when you do a family code, which they just did in Cuba, you got a majority of people that voted and actually voted in favor of this new family code. And we don't have a family code in the United States. In fact, I was looking at the family code of 1975, and it said in the family code, men must help women with household chores to lighten workload for working mothers. Imagine that discussion in this country. Boy, I mean, it's true. Men will probably hide under the bed if they hear that, if you have a discussion on that. And so, in an insane world, the most sane probably country in the world is Cuba, in an insane world. And imagine if it wasn't because they had a blockade, they probably could accomplish even more democratically ideas, instead of basically trying to defend the revolution from people that were consistently trying to destabilize them. And they wouldn't have to take certain measures that are making it difficult for them, just because a powerful country from the north wants to overthrow them because they set an example to them, about really something really should work. Imagine if we actually, like we went to the polls and actually had discussions on issues and they were implemented. How many times we hear in this country, oh, the percentage of people who believe in some type of abortion is 75%. Yet you got states in this country that are trying to make abortion illegal, where you have, different states where you want to basically prioritize religion instead of prioritizing things that is beneficial for all of us, because somebody's God is more powerful than another person's God. You have an issue right now with one of the congresswomen. She was taken off a committee, basically because she didn't support Israel. She didn't support Israel's regime against Palestine, and she didn't support she didn't go with the military-industrial complex with a lot of things, and she was taken off the committee. But if she would actually, but if these things wouldn't happen, like that in Cuba, and that's something that people need to realize. We need to realize what real democracy is, and we don't have it here, and that's difficult for some people to see. You know, it's really for some people to see. And you know, they're always consistently talking about Cuba like if wealth was really democracy. No, I could go to your house and steal everything you have, and all of a sudden, does that make me any more democratic than you? You just stole everything you had. You know, that's not democracy. Democracy is what the world really says, ruled by, for, and other people. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that, Fermin. So as I was doing my research, putting this together, I was, in terms of what we can learn from the Haitian people and using that for our own collective liberation to inform us here, I was astounded at the student struggle that successfully ousted and ended the military occupation of the US in 1934. You know, I think we here have a lot to learn by examining that history. You know, how did they sustain those those protests to oust an imperialist violent force like the US military occupation during that time? And and I think with the sanctions, right, as Fermin was talking about, and I think Lupe also raised as well, and you too, Ziomara, the tool of sanctions is so people can be disenchanted with what the working class people are envisioning and are currently building in that country. And so I think that is why, because Haiti already has a history, a very rich history of liberation, of constant struggle. The Haitian Revolution lasted 13 years, you know, and it was successful. So liberation and the fight for freedom runs in the veins of the Haitian people, and I think that uh, scares the Western powers the most, to see what could be implemented if the Haitian people had the ability to be a sovereign nation, to determine their own destiny and their own country. You know, following, would they follow the leadership of the EU and US powers, or would they follow more socialist countries like Nicaragua, like Venezuela, like Cuba? Would they do what China did by lifting over 800 million people out of extreme poverty? You know, this is why I think that these sanctions and other tools of economic warfare are utilized. And let me go ahead and see the second point or second question here. Yes, to what folks in the diaspora can do and what they are doing to connect struggles. As someone who is a recent member of Black Alliance for Peace, I can say the 5 years that I spent organizing for the decriminalization of adult consensual sex work, rarely, if ever, is imperialism and anti-imperialist stances taken in the sex workers' rights movement here in the US. And within 1 year of joining the Black Alliance for Peace, I already have all of these connections and all of these resources and elders to look to, resources to look to further understand how we here in the diaspora can support our brothers and sisters and siblings in countries that are being devastated right now by hot and cold war and tactics. So one of the things that has been coming up was the mass deportations that's going on right now in the Dominican Republic by the decree 66822. You have over 20,000 people have been deported. Close to 2,000 children have been deported. And this kind of anti-Black racist policies by the Dominican Republic president is what could lead to an ethnic cleansing or a massacre like the Parsley massacre in 1937, right? So you have numerous organizations that have signed on to letters demanding that policies like that be overturned, so that we can be in solidarity with Haitian descended Dominican people from the Dominican Republic. And I think that's something here that's emblematic of what people in the diaspora can do here. We can use our right to protest, we can use our right to organize, and understand that the anti-Black, racist, imperialist, and neocolonial policies that the US is trying to, that the US perpetuates onto other countries, we have a unique position in the belly of the beast to demand the cessation of this fiscal year alone. It was like $797.2 billion of our taxpayer dollars is going to perpetuating war. And so I think that speaks to things that we can do here as folks within the diaspora, you know, joining a radical organization like PSL, like Black Alliance for Peace, like Philly Bariquas, so many organizations that you can lend your skills to. I know here, the Black Alliance for Peace right now, we're currently looking for translators to translate a lot of the great material that we have and resources that we have to combat the propaganda that's always being disseminated by this white supremacist imperial core.
Thank you so much, Gasso. It's 7:45. We have a couple questions coming in from the chat. I have a question directly for Lupe. During your trip to Cuba, did you learn or see the importance of youth in their democratic processes like voting?
Yeah. So I know that there are a few comrades who had went to Cuba in November and got to see the elections firsthand. I didn't get to see them firsthand through voting, but I saw them through the members of parliament that I met, and really just learning how integrated groups are. Like, for example, like they have federations that are embedded in the governmental system. So they have the Federation of Cuban Women, for example, who have a set like designated number of representatives that they can have elected to public office, and the Federation of University Students. So a lot of those federations are already embedded in the electoral process. They have their kind of not quota per se, but they have their representation in there, and that they can have people from their groups in there. So it's a lot of really trying to embed the communities who, for example, the Federation of Cuban Women, they bring a different perspective, of course, into the discourse about legislation that is implemented. So it's a lot of making sure that everybody's voice is heard. For example, university students, making sure that the youth's voice is heard, making sure that also, for example, trans women's views are heard. I actually had the pleasure of one of the doctors at the hospitals that I visited in Matanzas, really just learning more about how they really try to integrate and be considerate of like the care of transgender people in Cuba, for example. So it was a lot of really trying to make sure everybody it's a lot of that attitude of trying to make sure everybody's voice is heard. And I kind of actually wanted to address the second question here from the chat for the history and or need for pan-Caribbean or pan-American solidarity in the struggle for democracy and socialism here. So it's a lot of really just understanding in terms of the history. It's just a lot of understanding that all of our struggles are inextricably tied. So for example, the Cuban intervention in Angola that happened in 1975, if I'm not mistaken. But just really in trying to remember that we are all one in our struggle. For example, Angola against apartheid in South Africa, making sure that their sovereignty after their independence was declared from Spain, making sure that they were protected in that. So it was a lot of just understanding that even though it wasn't the most popular opinion at the time, Cuba, I believe, was again kind of against the will of the Soviet Union, kind of going for it still, trying to be there for Angola, and even at a loss, a quote unquote loss, because for example, Angola needed medicine, needed military supplies, and even though Angola at the time maybe wasn't able to afford it, there's a quote from Fidel saying, "Can we at least make it for half the price? If so, we'll just give it to them." And it's a lot of just that solidarity and understanding that they were fighting for their sovereignty. Cuba had just been through it, like I believe not even 2 decades earlier from that intervention, or less than that. But just understanding that all of our struggles are one, even though I believe there's also a quote from Castro in just thinking about how he was saying how it would be that people would think it was crazy that they just a few decades before had enslaved people, and now they were going to send their own people to go fight in Angola. And it just goes to show how that switch occurred, and just understanding that we're all one, and that the struggle in Cuba was the same as the struggle in Angola, and we all needed to bring people together and to fight for their sovereignty. So just wanted to touch on that a bit.
Cuba and Puerto Rico have always been in solidarity with each other in many ways, even dating back to the Cuban Revolution, even dating back to the struggle for independence against Spain. One of its main leaders was Juan Ruiz Rivera, who was a general inside the military there, and he had major victories for the Cuban people. And there were many people that were Puerto Ricans who fought in that revolution. We have always been in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution. There is a brigade called Juan Ruiz Rivera Brigade in Puerto Rico that always takes trips to Cuba and sends donations to them in times of need. And we've also been attacked for doing that in Puerto Rico, especially as of this year. So there's many examples of people that have been Pan American or struggle for independence. Cubans struggling for our independence has always been consistent with the United Nations that Puerto Rico needs to be decolonized and needs to be respected as a free nation. I can go through the list of so many people. I mean, there was an American who was part of the struggle for our independence in 1868 in El Grito de Lares, and his name was, forgot his name right now, but he was arrested with his 5 children and hung with his 5 children. And he was from Mayagüez. I can't remember his name right now. I just forgot his name. But there's so many. Another guy who struggled so much. He came from Massachusetts to struggle in Vieques. His name was Roberto Rabin. Roberto Rabin was an American, of Jewish descent, and he had resources, and he was able to, implement so much knowledge and money and resources to our struggle. And he was part of that struggle to get the U.S. Navy out of Vieques. I mean, there's so many examples, that we can give, of people struggling, basically the person I was thinking of his name was Brugman. He was in the revolution in 1868, and him and his 5 children were involved in the revolution, were involved in El Grito de Lares, as we call it. And he was arrested and he was killed with his 5 children because he was part of that revolution, and he was part of the United States. He was an American. So, I mean, those are just some small examples of people that have struggled, and are basically, joined in the struggle. Puerto Ricans also joined in the struggle against fascist Franco. They were people who basically went to Spain to fight the fascists, and led by Franco. So I mean, and it was a bunch of people. Not it was 1 or 2. I think it was over 1,000. So it's just people to think about, how people have been involved in even from the Caribbean, even in American struggles, from the Caribbean, Marcus Garvey. I can go through a whole bunch of list of people, one of the great leaders of the island of Puerto Rico who basically was, taught African studies in the United States is probably, is Arturo Alfonso Schomburg. Today's Black History Month. How do people in this country don't know who Arthur Schomburg was? Basically, who brought all these lectures and books and found material, you know, of what African Americans contributed to the United States. I mean, there's so many we could talk about, you know, who brought back Benjamin Banneker, the architect of the White House that nobody talks about, you know. And just leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much for those examples, Fermin. I'm going to throw two more questions into the mix, and we're coming up on like 5 minutes before our ending point of 8 o'clock. Somebody in the chat said that they are curious to know more about the context of the prisoner swap resulting in the release of the Cuban Five, if anybody has more information about that. And then a final question, Frantz Fanon, you know, who wrote a lot about colonialism in the Caribbean, said that truth is what hastens the dislocation of the colonial regime. So I'm wondering, how are Caribbeans using truth-telling as a form of resistance? How can we in the US participate in that truth-telling? And I'm going to put both of those questions in the chat so people can reference back.
Yeah, just really quick to the context of the prisoner swap. I think that would take a bit and me trying to remember the details, but if I highly recommend the documentary Castro Spies, that goes a lot more into the context leading up to that. But I want to open it up for Gasso if you have anything to say about this question.
Unfortunately not. I am forever a student and most definitely still learning, but I can definitely speak to the second question in relation to truth telling here and the diaspora and the Caribbean. I think Black Alliance for Peace is uniquely situated in which we work with groups on the ground to get their stories out. So we are in communication with organizations that are actively trying to get these stories out and center the working class, working poor demands. And so I would say that one of the ways that folks can participate in that truth telling is by looking at other types of media, podcasts. There are a lot of really great leftist podcasts and news sources that are out there right now. I'm sure many of you know, unfortunately, that many of our media sources here in the US are owned by corporations that are just perpetuating white supremacist imperialist propaganda, especially right now during this time, but as they always have been. So I just want to lift up news sites like the Black Agenda Report, podcasts like Voices with Vision, the Black Myths podcast. Again, Black Alliance for Peace has amazing contributors that support the Haiti Americas team, the Africa team, like people like Jemima Pierre. I don't know where I would have been with this presentation had it not been for her contributions to shedding a light on the imperialist context, the historical context that has left Haiti essentially in ruins. And so I think that's one of the ways in which we can support truth-telling is by supporting organizations and projects like those that I just mentioned, sharing them with friends and family, and also struggling when you do hear propaganda talking points and amongst your networks.
Yeah, I just kind of want to hop onto that and really say, like really supporting those grassroots independent news sites is really essential in the shadow banning that we see of all of the news, like independent news networks like Gray Zone. In particular, the news outlet that's really helped me in my political development is Breakthrough News. It's their @BT News newsroom on Instagram and Twitter, and they've just been really great in having organic video footage of what's going on the ground, not really leaning towards whoever's funding them, as we always see in like CNN and the mainstream media. And also a really great resource that I've really considered in wherever you get podcasts is a socialist program with Brian Becker. It's all really great to understanding, for example, the political situation in Ukraine. It really gives a grounded understanding of what's going on and really explaining the political context, because a lot of what we hear in the news is just what's going on today, and that XYZ people were killed and XYZ has happened. But what matters is the political context that it has occurred. Like, why are we here today? It's just as important to understand. And a lot of that context is left out on purpose, really, to let people be misconstrued about the emotions that come with today's news coverage. So I just want to bring light to those two particular resources, and also just to how the Caribbeans are using truth telling. Actually, the Cuban people, at least, they have a lot of, for example, channels. A lot of news networks that are there telling the news day in and day out in a very objective manner. Like, for example, they may not have, at least the programs that I saw, they have just like news articles playing on the TV for people to read, and they'll cycle through them every day and just going over what's going on, not just in Cuba, but internationally, what is going on. So the people are informed what is going on in the world, because it's just as important for us to know, just as it is important to know what's going on in our city, our town, our street. It's just as important to know what's going on 2,000 miles away, 3,000 miles away, all across the country, all around the world. So I think it's really important to understand that it's just it's critical for us to be informed and keep ourselves informed as much as possible with the credible news outlets that will tell us at face value what is going on. It's important to ask questions, be critical of what we hear. So I just wanted to add that.
I thought it was important for us when a few years ago, there was a book that came out that said War Against All Puerto Ricans, written by Nelson Dennis. And it was a bestseller, you know. And that book was important because what happens with us is we, as the colonial subjects, we are stripped of our history. And so if you ask any Puerto Ricans, whether they're in Puerto Rico, whether in the United States, you know, what's the history of Puerto Rico? And they can't really, they all line up to one of the biggest traders we've ever had, called Luis Muñoz Marin. And they don't talk about, you know, the real history, which is the history of struggle that we're talking about now, the history of women, the history of the labor movement, the history of materialism in Puerto Rico, the history of queer folks, the history of LGBT rights. Those histories, the histories of all kinds of struggles, are never mentioned in Puerto Rico. And so the history right now we're going through with the privatization of the electric company, the history of privatizing everything. None of that is ever spoken to us about throughout our history. And so when we got a book like that, with Nelson Denny's book is War Against All Puerto Ricans, it finally got to a lot of Puerto Ricans in the United States. And one of the biggest lies that was ever perpetrated, that we were a free associated state. Like that, it makes any sense at all. How the hell are you free and associated at the same time? And people just bought that, you know, ate that up, you know, and ate it in their brains until they're finally now, after so many years of the lie, people are actually saying, yeah, we're a colony. We really are a colony. And so it took it. We're not an education. Fidel even said it. Fidel even said, yeah, we were a neo-colony, but we knew our history. We knew our heroes. Puerto Ricans don't know their heroes. You know, some Puerto Ricans, are they going to tell you that George Washington was their hero? He didn't free any blacks. He didn't free any Puerto Ricans. You know what I'm saying? But Betances did. Betances freed blacks. You know what I'm saying? Betances really tried to free Puerto Ricans in 1868. And so that's the problem we have, because you'll go in and you'll go to any place here and you'll sit right next to a Puerto Rican. And I learned Black history here, and I knew who Malcolm X was. I knew who Martin Luther King was, but I didn't know who Pedro Albizu Campo was, because nobody ever taught me that. And so that part of it, that's what Puerto Ricans are missing. That's why the struggle is difficult, because you got to know who you are. You got to know where you came from. And so once you know that struggle, once you know who your real leaders are, then you take inspiration from real leaders. You don't take inspirations from people that were slave owners and people that actually, it's a difficult situation when you do not know your history. And that's one of the first steps towards liberation. Okay.
Thank you so much, Fermin. So we're coming up on 8:05, guys. I want to be respectful of everybody's time tonight. Panelists, did you have any final comments before we kind of close the Q&A session?
I just want to say thank you to my fellow co-panelists and to you as a moderator. I learned so much today, and I think that for me, that was a really great place to leave it off. The need to know thyself and how important the process of decolonizing is to this movement.
Yeah, same likewise. Same likewise. We need to decolonize the Caribbean because it is probably the most colonized place in the world. It probably is, but we do need to decolonize.
Yeah, same. Yeah, everybody's basically said exactly what I wanted to say. But thank you all so much for helping me learn so much about the histories of these other oppressed countries.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I echo that sentiment. I learned so much, and I really do feel very hopeful right now that with comrades like you all, countries in the Caribbean will be free and sovereign nations. People will have rights to self-determination, and we'll build socialism and a better future and a more progressive future for all of us. I want to thank everybody for joining, and just remind people that if you like tonight's programming, the Philly Liberation Center and PSL Philly host events like this all the time. You can find us on our social media. On Instagram, we're at Philly Liberation Center and PSL Philly. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, so look for us there. There's links to donate if you guys want to help be sustainers and support our work, because we're a grassroots self-funded organization. There's also links to our calendar of events if you want to come to more programming. And I think that concludes tonight. Thank you all so much for making this an amazing panel and discussion. All power to the people.
All power to the people.
No compromise, no retreat, y'all.
No,
Peace.
socialism for the world.
Yeah.
You're here. Bye, y'all.
Yay. Thank you so much, Gasso. Thank you, guys. This was amazing.
So has the heating been fixed? I hope.
I think
Any
it's
updates?
not as of today.
That's real. That's real. Well, I hope to visit one day. Bye.
Absolutely. Bye.